Let's do that hockey.
Hey everybody, welcome to the DobberProspects Radio Podcast, episode number 122. I'm your host, Peter Harling, and on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about some of the players who stood out to me at the Memorial Cup recently, and I'm also going to go over my final top 32 rankings for the 2022 NHL Entry Draft. So before I tuck into that, let's take a second to talk about the DobberProspects Fantasy Prospect Report. It's the 16th annual edition. It's available now. Links in show notes. This report is, if you listen to this podcast, I'm sure you've heard of it and you probably own it and have combed over it already. But in the off chance that you're kind of new to this show and you're into fantasy hockey and you're into deep leagues, this is the must-have guide. It goes over the top about 15 prospects that are fantasy relevant for every NHL team. It has the top 50 prospects rankings for players that have not played a single game in the NHL. It has the top 25 goalie prospects, and it also has a pretty thorough draft guide for the 2022 draft as well. Most of that information is compiled by David Hall and the DobberProspects draft scouting team. It's got rankings for forwards, wingers, defense, goalies, power forward ranking. It's got the top 25 points only fantasy rankings for the 2022 NHL draft. And for more stuff on that, take a listen for an upcoming episode soon from Dauber's Draftcast, which I'll be guesting on later on today. When we record that, it'll have a number of the other DobberProspects contributors and writers, and we'll be going over our rankings for the top 50. There's a number of senior writers that contributed to that, and then we take the Dauber's rankings, managing editor David Hall's, and compare those two rankings to the consensus rankings, and it's all available to see who was ranked by whom, when, and where. So that's a really interesting tool to read. Also, for more 2022 draft coverage, take a listen to some of my last episodes. Episode 121, I went over the top prospects for the draft from the United States National Team Development Program with special guest Pete Krupski, and Pete had some really great insight into some of those players. And this year's first round is just loaded with guys from that program, kind of like the 19 draft that had Jack Hughes, Matt Boldy, Spencer Knight, Cam York, and a laundry list of players. So I don't think that the NTD's crop this year is the same kind of quality as that year, but the same kind of quantity. So that's interesting. And then the previous episode to that, episode 120, I went deep on Shane Wright with Kingston Frontenac's television host Alan Edmansky. He and I watched a lot of Shane Wright this year, so we talk a lot about his perceived slow start and bad season, and that he didn't have a season worthy of a number one pick, and reasons why we both still believe he's the number one prospect from this year's draft class. So before I get too far into that stuff, let's start with talking about the Memorial Cup. So anyone who's listening who's not too familiar with what the Memorial Cup is, the Canadian Hockey League, it's a league that governs the three individual junior hockey leagues in Canada, the WHL out west, the Ontario Hockey League, and then everything east of that is the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Each one of those leagues runs independently of each other. They have two division conferences, and they have a playoff. The top 16 teams get in. They have just similar to the NHL playoff, East versus West finalists play for the championship. So of those three leagues, the three champions are granted entry into the Memorial Cup tournament, along with a predetermined host city. And the host city is selected about a season before, and they're selective as to who they choose. There's a number of criteria that go into that. They have to have the city and the facilities to accommodate a tournament of that size and scope, but the team also has to be projected as a contender to qualify for the Memorial Cup, because they don't want a team that's, that doesn't even make the playoffs, and then they show up in the Memorial Cup and they're playing the best of the best and just get tuned up every night for 5 nights in their hometown. So they choose teams that have a very strong roster, usually loaded with older players as well. So the contestants for this tournament were the Edmonton Oil Kings, the WHL champions, the Hamilton Bulldogs were the OHL champions, and the Shawinigan Cataracts were the champs from the Q, and the host city was the St. John Sea Dogs. And St. John's had a very good season, and they've got great players, but they lost in the second round. So they got a bit of a break. They didn't play for about a month before all the champions were crowned and the Memorial Cup began. So they went in healthy and fresh, and I think you could make an argument that gave them a pretty distinct advantage as they ended up winning the whole tournament. All the teams played great, and there are several players who I could talk about, and I really want to get into that. So let's start with the Memorial Cup MVP, MVP, William Dufour, member of the St. John Sea Dogs, the host team, right winger. He's 20 years old, so he's in his final year of junior eligibility. He's got really good size. He's 6'3", 205. He's got a great shot. His shot is bread and butter. He's a shooter and a goal scorer. He was selected in the 2020 NHL Draft by the New York Islanders late in the 5th round, 152nd overall. And he's jumped around a little bit in the league. Skating has been a bit of a concern for him, but he didn't look very slow out there to me in the Memorial Cup. He was the Quebec MVP for the regular season, scoring 56 goals, which was the most of all the leagues. Next closest was the OHL. Luke Evangelista had 55, and King in the Dub had 52. So he had 56 goals and 60 assists for 116 points. The big guy racked up 40 penalty minutes. He's too valuable to be roughing it up and spending too much time in the penalty box. But you can expect that when he gets into higher levels, his offensive totals, which were gigantic this season, those will come way down, and expect his hits and penalty minutes numbers to drive up. In the playoffs, as I said, they lost in the second round, so he only played 5 games, so that's less than 2 rounds worth, so he would have been injured, I suppose. I didn't watch their playoffs, but he had 4 points, 2 goals and 2 assists for 4 points. In the Memorial Cup, he played every game, 4 games, and he had 7 goals and 1 assist for 8 points. That's 2 points a game for those keeping score. Now, 4 of those goals came in one game. He had a 4-goal outburst in a game where they were facing elimination against, I can't remember who, and I think they were down a couple of goals, and he just decided that they were going to win and outscored the opposition single-handedly. The DobberProspects guide, which I mentioned earlier, has William Dufour in there, of course. He is the New York Islanders' top prospect for multi-category fantasy leagues. His comparison for the NHL is Tom Wilson, and the DobberProspects upside forecast for him, and then keep in mind the upside forecast is, if everything goes well for this guy, this is what you could possibly be looking at as the best case scenario. And we're looking at 30 goals, 40 assists, and 70 points with 100 penalty minutes and 250 hits. That would be amazing. He will be heading to the American Hockey League. His NHL ETA is 2024-25 campaign. So maybe that's a player, if you're in multi-cat leagues that are deep, that's a guy who, being a 5th round pick, could be sliding under the radar with a low ownership. He might be available in your leagues. He might be someone you want to try and stash away on your prospect bench, and just kind of keep an eye and see how, being big and dominating at 20 years old in junior hockey isn't uncommon. And what is uncommon is for those players to carry that over all the way up to the NHL level. So, he's a bit of a long shot, but, if you can sign him as a free agent or trade him, acquire him in a trade for not too much, it'd be a great ad. Not a blue chip prospect like my next guy, Mason McTavish. Hamilton Bulldogs. He's 19 years old, similar size. He's 6'1", 207, and he's a first-round, third overall selection by the Anaheim Ducks in 2021. This year, he started the season in the NHL. He played the 9 games. He had 3 points in the NHL. He also, in that span, had a cup of coffee in the American Hockey League. Played 3 games, had 2 points. Ultimately, he was returned to Junior, who the Peterborough Petes owned his rights from the previous season. Shortly after he returned, they facilitated a trade to Hamilton. His combined stats from the OHL this season was 29 regular season games played, because he started the season pro hockey, and he took a break for the World Juniors, and he took a break for the Olympics as well. So in only 29 games, he managed to score 20 goals and 27 assists for 47 points. In the playoffs, Hamilton played 19 games. That's all it took for them to win. So that means they had like 3 sweeps before they got to the final, and they played, I think they went 7 games in the final against Windsor. And in 19 games, he had 16 goals and 13 assists for 29 points. He was just unstoppable. In the Memorial Cup, he played 5 games, 6 goals, 2 assists for 8 points. And as I mentioned, he played for Canada at the Olympics, and he had a point in 5 games there against, NHL competition. He's the DobberProspects guide has him ranked as Anaheim's top prospect, their top sniper, their number 1 forward for fantasy points only, as well as their top prospect for multi-category. The comparison for him is Jamie Benn, and the upside forecast is 40 goals, 40 assists, 80 points, and 80 penalty minutes as well. He's a center, so he'll stash you some face-off wins as well. Count on him to deliver a decent amount of hits, but not an egregious amount. He's just got a wicked release. His one-timer is deadly. He's NHL ready now. He's a player who's should be 100% Fantrax owned. So if you've got him, I'm sure you're smiling listening to this, and if you don't have him, well, you're like me, and that's just too bad. So he'll be in the NHL, I think, next season, and I think he'll be potentially a contender for the Calder Trophy, but I don't think right away he'll put up the kind of points that you need to win the Calder. There might be some prospects who have a little bit more pro seasoning, but yeah, he's not out of the contest or competition. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about a couple Shawinigan players, the Killer Bees, Xavier Bourgault and Mavrik Bourque. So Xavier Bourgault is 19 years old. He's 6', 172. The Edmonton Oilers selected him with their first round pick in 2021. That was about 22nd overall. He has been lighting up the queue for a few seasons now. This season he had 43 games, 36 goals, 39 assists for 75 points. And in the playoffs, he had 22 points in 16 games, and in 7 points in the Memorial Cup in just 4 games, 2 goals and 5 assists. So this is a player that Edmonton is obviously very, very high on. If you're an Edmonton Oilers fan, you might be upset that they selected him instead of Jesper Wallstedt based on organizational need. But I think you're going to get over that pretty quickly once Edmonton fans start seeing this guy in their roster. He's a versatile player. He can play up and down your roster. He can he has value in a bottom six role because he's a two-way guy, but he's also got the sneaky release shot, good IQ, great puck skills. He's a good skater, so he can play up in your top six as well. He's a center slash winger. The Dobber Prospect Guide lists his comparable as Matt Duchene, and they're forecasting 40, 40, 80 points for him as well. He's a blue chip prospect draft as soon as possible. He's the Edmonton Oilers' top sniper. He is their top fantasy upside forward, and he's their top prospect in points only league. And he and Bourque were the Shawinigan line. Shawinigan won they made it to the final. They didn't win, but those two killer bees were just unstoppable sometimes. They're reading off each other, both looking NHL ready. So let's talk about Mavrik Bourque. He is 20 years old. Also, he's 5'10", 185. So slightly short, but he's not a thin or weak player by any means. And the Dallas Stars selected him in 2020 in the first round at 30th overall. He was the Q's playoff MVP, scoring 25 points in 16 games en route to a championship there. In the regular season, he only played 31 games, 20 goals, 48 assists for 68 points. That's 2.19 points per game. He dominated and was a driver on that line with Bourgault. He played in some NHL in the lockout, and he looked good there. He's basically a player who I think is NHL ready now. The challenge for him with Dallas will be cracking the roster, so he might go to the American Hockey League to start. Don't be surprised if he gets a recall, or even, quite frankly, just makes the Stars lineup out of training camp. I think he's that good. The Dobber Prospect Guide has his NHL comparable as Travis Konechny, and they're forecasting 35, 45, 80 points for him. It's another blue chip prospect that we recommend drafting as soon as possible. All right, so this is an interesting player. His name is Arber Xhekaj, and the way you spell his name is Arber. So far, so good. But the last name is spelled Xhekaj, and somehow you get Xhekaj out of that. I spoke about him on a previous episode talking about Montreal Canadiens top prospects, episode 119. With Habs expert Amy Johnson. We dove into Arber Xhekaj quite a little bit. But to save you going back and listening to that episode while you're here, he's 21 years old, so he's an overage player in junior, and he's a monster. He's 6'4", 225 pounds. He was actually never drafted in the Ontario Hockey League. He just was a walk-on tryout, made the Kitchener Rangers, and then was invited to Montreal Canadiens rookie camp in 2021, and they extended an invitation to their regular camp, and then he was signed in October of 2021 to an NHL contract. So, just because you're never drafted doesn't mean you'll never make it, but what we're looking at here is he's a hometown player too. He's a Hamilton native, and so Hamilton won the OHL championship, so that was pretty cool to see him win that. So a little bit more about where he came up in 2019-20 season with Kitchener. He played 51 games, and I guess this was kind of his breakout season. It's the one that got him on some scouts' radars. So he played 51 games. He had 6 goals and 17 points and 88 penalty minutes. So the PIMs really pop out at you there. In the pandemic season of 2021, he did not play. The start of this season in Hamilton, 21-22, in Kitchener, and then shortly after was traded to Hamilton. His total point stat line for the regular season this year was 51 games, 34 points with 12 goals, 84 penalty minutes, and he was a plus 37. So he really started to, exert his will on the game. And for a big guy, he moves around pretty well. And he's not a burner or anything like that, but skating is not a liability with him. And he's got a long reach with his stick, and he's big and strong, and he was really able to exploit that at the OHL level. He played a ton of minutes, was Hamilton's number one defenseman along with Nathan Staios. The two of them were just lights out good. In the playoffs, 18 games, 16 points, 50 penalty minutes, plus 15. And in his 5 games in the Memorial Cup, he didn't score a goal, but he had 5 assists, so 5 points. I think there's an appetite in the NHL for the throwback defenseman. For a long time now, we've seen a trend where size didn't really matter, and all that was important was defensemen could skate and create offense transitionally, right? Like get the puck back in the defensive zone and then turn it around. Make a smart stretch pass or skate it out or whatever. Lead the rush, join the rush, and run a power play and not be a liability defensively. So you didn't need to be 6'4", 205 pounds for that. But I think there's an appetite coming back right now, if I'm reading the tea leaves right, where NHL teams want a couple of defensemen on their blue line that have that element of their game of being, north of 6'2", north of 200 pounds, can be mean and physical. I mean, you watch the NHL playoffs and, the referees put the whistle away and it lends to that type of game. And if you don't have a player like that on your roster, it can be a little bit challenging sometimes. Now, they want a player that's 6'5", 204 pounds and mean, but he has to be able to skate and do all those other things as well. They can't just be one-dimensional defensive defensemen. They have to be able to do more than just glassing out when they get the puck in the defensive zone. Now, does Xhekaj have that kind of offensive upside? I'm not too sure about that. I mean, he's got a really heavy shot, but he doesn't have much offensive vision. Now, I still think he's got NHL upside. I mean, Montreal signed him to a contract. He's played his overage season, so he's going pro. And he'll play for Laval next season for sure. So that'll be something interesting to keep an eye on, is when his size, weapon, and advantage that he really exploited masterfully last season in the OHL, when that is mitigated playing pro hockey in the American Hockey League, where players are often, they're all going to be the same age or older. They're all going to be strong and good skaters. Will he be able to still be dominant defensively, and will he be effective creating transition? That remains to be seen. However, I think it's definitely worth an investment if you're in a multi-category fantasy league, because he could just be a monster where he gets the NHL and he's good enough to play at the NHL level, and he's going to block a ton of shots, he's going to deliver a ton of hits, and he's going to rack up a boatload of penalty minutes, not unlike Radko Gudas. The next player is Ryan Winterton. So this is a 18-year-old. He has another year of junior hockey coming up. He was drafted in 2021 by Seattle in the 3rd round, 67th overall. Another guy with good size, 6'2", 190. The 2021 season, he did not play in the OHL, of course. So this is his draft year. He played in the U18s, 7 games there with Canada en route to a gold. Played in a defensive, physical, energy, shutdown, checking kind of role, but he had 4 points in 7 games. This season, he only played 37 games. He had some injuries. He had 20 goals and 26 assists for 46 points in 37 games on Hamilton, which is, a pretty loaded team. Played 18 games in the playoffs, had 19 points, 5 games in the Memorial Cup with 3 goals and 3 assists for 6 points. So I think he's going to be projecting as a potentially a complementary offensive player, middle 6 kind of range. I don't see him even in Seattle, making their top six. But he does do a very good job of driving pucks to the net. He's got a good shot. He's a good net front presence. He uses his size and power to, like I said, drop the shoulder, drive to the net, get pucks on goal. He does have a good shot, and he's a pretty good two-way player. Hamilton's coach said just recently on Twitter that he was playing with an injury, so it's suspecting that he will miss this August Summer World Junior Championships for Canada. He might even be a little bit late coming back to start the season. He was late starting this season, so that's starting to raise a little bit of a red flag about him potentially being a Band-Aid boy. Another player I want to talk about from Hamilton, and this guy really impressed me. That's Logan Morrison. He is the assistant captain for the Bulldogs. He's 19 years old. He's 6'0", 180 pounds. And in the 1920 season was his draft year. He had 59 games played, 23 goals, 22 assists, 45 points. Good, not bad, not great. Didn't get drafted. Last year, did not play. There was no OHL for him to play in, so he didn't get drafted in his Draft Plus 1 season. This will be his Draft Plus 2 season, if I'm not mistaken. And this year, he popped. He had 60 games, 34 goals, and 66 assists for a 100-point season. That's 1.67 points per game. He was the OHL playoff MVP, leading Hamilton to a championship, scoring 39 points in 19 games, 2.05 points per game. Very consistent offensive producer. Played 5 games in the Memorial Cup, had 8 points there. Really drove the offense for the Bulldogs. His NHL hockey IQ is... his hockey IQ, I think, is NHL ready now. He's got really great offensive upside. Now, in his draft year, he was kind of dubbed as undersized, but I think he's kind of grown out of that now. He's 6'1", 180, so I wouldn't consider that to be undersized. He does not play a very aggressive physical game, but when you watch him get the puck on the power play or in the offensive zone, he's very calculated in what he does. He makes really good, deceptive, quick, short-range moves, quick touch passes to create time and space and opening and availability, and he scans the ice very well, and all of a sudden, he'll be shifting left and right, making quick little passes from the half wall down to the behind the net, and then all of a sudden he makes this brilliant stretch pass across the ice to the defenseman pinching in from the other side for an easy tap in. That's the kind of game that you're going to get from Logan Morrison. And so he's going to be draft eligible for 2022. He did not make my first round, but he did make my rankings, and I have him in at 60th overall, which is kind of high. The only other person that had him that I could see ranked higher than me was Craig Button, who has him at 49th. And lots of respect for Mr. Button's rankings. So anyways, Logan Morrison, a player, it'd be very interesting to see where he's drafted in the 2022 draft coming up. I'm hoping for his sake that he gets drafted by a team like Arizona or Seattle, teams that have multiple picks, could roll the dice on a guy who's a little bit more developed and fast track him into their organization, into the American Hockey League, and possibly into the NHL sooner than later, based on how shallow and deep, not deep, their prospect pools are. All right, so those are the top prospects that I wanted to talk about in detail from the Memorial Cup. There were some other really good prospects there that stood out to me as well. A couple of Calgary Flames defensemen playing for the Sea Dogs. Jeremy Poirier, he played 4 games, had 3 points. Really good offensive defenseman, just very, very dangerous offensively. Plays like a forward. Some of the knocks on his game or concerns have been, is he a liability defensively? And I think he's come a long way in addressing those concerns. And he's a player I think could be fantasy relevant very soon. Yan Kuznetsov started the season playing pro hockey and then was returned to to junior, mainly I think because the Sea Dogs were hosting the Memorial Cup, so they knew that he would get a lot of really good, valuable games and experience. Physical defenseman, not as offensive as Poirier, but definitely brings the hammer. Matched Poirier in points in the Memorial Cup, though. 3 points in 4 games. They both had a goal and 2 assists. Another really strong defenseman who I think is going to be contending for NHL job in the very near future is Montreal Canadiens prospect Caden Gooley, who played for the Edmonton Oil Kings. 3 points in 3 games. The Oil Kings didn't really fare very well in the tournament. They were the first team eliminated. But Caden Gooley brings it all. He's got the size, he's got the defensive game. He's a shutdown defenseman, and he also drives the play offensively. There's just nothing to not like about his game, and I think he could turn out to be a real horse on the blue line for Montreal. Montreal also had Jan Mysak playing with Hamilton. He's a forward, center winger. 2 points in 5 games there for him. So I saw him play quite a bit in the OHL playoffs too. He was a good supplementary offensive player for them. Wasn't on their main line with Morrison or McTavish. But when those guys weren't getting it done, you got to look down your roster and find someone on another line that can score for you or score a big goal. And Jan Mysak scored a number of important goals for Hamilton on the way. And last but certainly not least, I kind of want to touch on Jake Neighbors. He's a St. Louis Blues prospect, and I'm just in love with this guy. He's a rugged winger. He plays a really gritty, mean physical game. He's got good offensive upside as well, and I think he's another player who could be looking at a job in the NHL as soon as next season. All right, so that's the Memorial Cup. Let's take this in a different direction and talk about the 2022 NHL Draft. It's coming up in less than a week's time, and I'll be there. I'm leaving in a couple of days. I'll be going on a couple other podcasts to talk about some of my favorite prospects from it. So let's just go through my rankings. Now, my rankings are not fantasy based, but I put an emphasis on that in some cases. So I like players who have a good NHL certainty and upside. I also put a little bit of value on players who I think can provide physicality. So I'm looking at, most importantly, hockey sense or hockey IQ and skating ability. If you don't have those two things, the deck is really stacked against you to make it to the NHL. So those are my top 2 categories when looking at prospects. Then I look at what's their skill level. I like offensive upside. You can find a whole bunch of players who can play defense and grind games down to a halt, but there's a premium on players who can put the puck in the net, or who can facilitate other players putting the puck in the net. So those are some of the things that I look at most. Now, spoiler alert, I already mentioned it. I had Shane Wright number 1. Listen to my episode with Alan Admansky, and we kind of go over Shane Wright in detail. Why I like Shane Wright number 1 is, well, if you're looking at who's got the most offensive upside in this draft, is it Shane Wright or the field? I'll take the field. Thank you very much. But when I look at Shane Wright, we talk about the comparisons for him, and Patrice Bergeron is a name that comes up a lot. And as Alan and I mentioned, Bergeron is a first ballot Hall of Famer, right? He may never have scored 100 points in the NHL, and Shane Wright probably won't either. But if Shane Wright's career ends and he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, then I don't think you can really begrudge him being selected first overall. I think Shane Wright is NHL ready now. I don't think he'll hit the ground running at the NHL if Montreal drafts him first. He makes the team in early October. I think they'll insulate him a little bit, but he won't be sheltered. He'll his game is very reliable defensively. I think it'll take him a little bit of time to adapt to having this caliber of teammates he'll have in the NHL. He looked better at the U18s for Canada than he has in the OHL and in league play. And Kingston had a pretty stacked lineup offensively. You know, they had Martin Chromiak, Zaid Wisdom, Lucas Edmonds. So, you know, he had wingers to play with the Frontenacs, and he looked good with them. But and as good as their hockey sense is, you know, they're not NHL players. So when Shane Wright gets playing with guys who he can predict where they're going, and they can play a system that's better as well, I think Shane Wright will not look out of place there. Now, my forecast for him this season would probably be pretty modest. You know, maybe around the 30-point range. But I think once Montreal's development comes along, you're going to find Shane Wright being a first-line center there. And if he's your second-line center, then that means he's playing behind someone excellent. You know, like, you don't begrudge Leon Draisaitl or Getty Malkin for not being first-line centers on their teams. That kind of thing. So I have Shane Wright ranked number 1. My top 3 was very tight. Number 2, I went with Juraj Slafkovsky. Now, comparing my rankings to who I consider to be the best in the business would be Bob McKenzie. Now, Bob's rankings are a little bit of his own opinion, I think, but a lot of he polls NHL scouts and gets their rankings. Because, you know, those are trade secrets, but Bob's been in the business for so long and he's got trust and reputation that they share them with him. So basically, Bob's rankings tend to be a consensus of what NHL scouts think. Not necessarily what that scout's team will do, but what that particular scout thinks. And he had Slafkovsky number 1 ahead of Shane Wright. So we had our top 2 picks flipped. Slafkovsky probably going to play and check again for one more season, but when he comes to the NHL, probably the year after that, you know, you're going to be looking at a big, strong, man-sized power winger, goal scorer, lit up the Olympics with scoring and looked great at the World Championship as well. So there's a lot to get excited about for Slafkovsky. Number 3 on my list, Logan Cooley, top-ranked player coming out of the States, National Team Development Plan. Program. Bob has him ranked 3 also. I went over in detail with him with Pete Krupski, and you know, this is a player who could have the most offensive upside in the NHL draft. He's got great vision, and his compete level is very good. He'll be heading to the University of Minnesota, so not going to be in the NHL immediately. So that kind of also helped slot him in at 3 out of my top 3 rankings there. I think Slafkovsky and Wright could both be in the NHL right away, but Logan Cooley's not going to be. He's going to be playing the NCAA. Probably a one and done, so you know, it's not like you're going to have to wait forever for this guy, but there could be a wait there. 4th on my list was David Xhekaj, big right shot defenseman. Injury slowed his season down a little bit, but there was a lot of hype going into the season for him. And you know, I caught some games and clips and videos of him before the season started as well, and I was like, oh my god, this guy's going to be great. You know, so he had a little bit of a disappointing season, but that's mainly because of injury. You know, he's got size, mobility, he's got a heavy shot, he's got some offensive upside as well. So he's got the whole package, right? Right shot defenseman with all of those attributes. What's not to like? He's got all the tools that NHL teams dream of adding to their blue line. Bob had him at 6th. So the 2 top ranked defensemen are Nemec and Xhekaj. And I gave my edge to Xhekaj. It was slightly over Simon Nemec, another right shot defenseman. You know, everything to like about his game as well. Not many can match the size and all around game that he brings. I think his offensive upside may be unmatched in this draft class from the back end. He's got great hockey sense, vision, and passing ability. Those are all NHL ready now skills. So Bob likes Nemec over Xhekaj. Number 6 on my list, going back to the National Team Development Program, you're going to hear a lot of names from the NTDB on my list. So I really like Cutter Gauthier. He's big, he's strong, he's skilled, he can play wing, he thinks he can play center. So he projects as a versatile and impactful player, both offensively and physically. Bob's got him ranked 5th, so he actually split the Nemec Xhekaj D package and put Gauthier right in the middle. I already posted my final rankings, but if I could do it again, I would actually put him a bit ahead of both of those defensemen. I would rank Gauthier 4th. I'm really high on him. He really stood out and was dominant at the U18s. He really impressed me there. He scored 9 points in 6 games there. He's headed to Boston College. He compares himself to Austin Matthews. He likes to play like Austin Matthews. I'm not sure if I see that sort of similarity. I think he plays a little bit more aggressively and physically than Matthews does, and I think Matthews has better shot and hockey sense. But I mean, hey, if you're just a couple of steps down from Matthews, that's last time I looked, that was pretty good. So number 7 on my list, and Bob's as well, is Joachim Kemmel, the right winger playing in Liga, projected to be potentially the best goal scorer in this draft. He has got some kind of lopsided stats. He's a Cy Young kind of guy. He's got way more goals than assists. That's a bit of a red flag for me. It makes me wonder what their hockey sense is like. So you can score a lot of goals. So you've got a great shot. That's good. You probably got some deception and quick release, very accurate, hard and quick, and those skills will allow you to score a lot of goals at the junior level. It might not translate super well to the pro level if you don't have the smarts and the reads to play with your teammates, get some assists, find open ice, and so on and so forth. Injuries in the second half of the second season took some of the wind out of his sales and draft stock, but I still have him ranked 7. I think the skill level is very good. Number 8 on my list is Frank Nazar. Bob has him way down at 15, so he and I don't see eye to eye on this one. But I find that Nazar's skating report reads a lot like Logan Cooley's. They're both a little undersized. They're speedy. They're very smart. He's an offensive dynamo. He thinks the game fast. He has hands and feet to match. On my previous episode with Pete Krupski, he says he reminds him a little bit of Matt Barzal. Another really favorable comparison. Number 9 on my list is a guy who I'm personally really high on. I probably have him higher than a lot of other people. Bob has him ranked 24th, but I got him ranked 9th, and that's Denton Matejchuk, left shot defenseman for the Moose Jaw Warriors. So this kid plays with NHL level pace. He reads the play. He's all over the ice. He's a bit of a rover out there. He is very, very puck hungry. He chases pucks down, and then when he gets them, he just drives them straight to the goal. Like that's a winger's job, kind of. I think he's got the upside to be one of the biggest offensive impact defensemen in this draft, and there's even a chance that he could be a multi-positional guy and play a little bit of wing at some point, or he could be converted to a wing. Anyways, he's a player that personally is one of my favorites. Number 10, I've got Jonathan Lekari-Maki. Bob's got him 8. He's another sniper, big time shooter, lethal shot. He can light the lamp. But he's got more elements to his game than just goal scoring, and that's what I like about him. His bread and butter is definitely his shot, though, but he's a guy that's got top 6 upside. He was actually just drafted in the CHL import draft late in the second round, but I'd be shocked if he came over to play junior hockey in Canada. I mean, he played J20 and SHL last season. He got good minutes in the SHL, so I feel like after playing, good minutes in a men's pro league in your draft year, to go to North America and take a step back and play junior hockey doesn't make much sense to me. Be interesting to see what NHL team drafts him and what they want to see for him. That will have a lot of influence onto where he goes. So even if he's told CHL teams, I'm very open to coming over and playing in North America, if he gets drafted by the Philadelphia Flyers, and they're like, no, we want you to either play in the American Hockey League or stay in the SHL, then that will kibosh that. Number 11 on my list is one of the players who was early ranked as a potential contender for first overall with Shane Wright, and that's Matthew Savoy. He had a solid draft season. His first full campaign in the Dub, he played a little bit as a underage player there, and then the pandemic season kind of cut short what would have been his first full season. And he was an impact player on an all-star Winnipeg Ice roster, and he had 90 points. The big concern in his game, though, is his size at 5'9", 180 pounds. He was ranked 9th on Bob McKenzie's list, so he had him slightly higher than I had him. And he's a player that I think has really good fantasy upside as well. He's just a really crafty player. His brother's playing in the NCAA, Carter, and he's a goal scorer. But Matt's a little bit more rounded than that. The undersized thing, that's not necessarily always a concern with me, as you know from listening to this podcast. 5'9" is not too small. 180 pounds isn't too light either. But I've seen some clips of his games, and his head's not always up. He got rocked earlier and was missing time with a concussion. It was kind of Eric Lindros, Scott Stevens reminiscent, going over the blue line, looking at the puck, and next thing you know, he was looking at the ceiling, wondering where he was. So that can be a bit of a concern. My 12th ranked player, a bit of a wild card, Danila Yurov, Russian player. So he's certainly got the talent to be inside my top 10. But, he's likely going to slip on draft day, and he slipped on my rankings a little bit as well, mainly because of the Russian factor. I guess the question is, how far does he slide? His usage in the KHL was limited. It would have been nice to see him play in North America and in the CHL and get some good minutes. But you got to wonder how long is it going to be before he can get out of Russia and come to North America, if he's even interested. McKenzie had him ranked pretty similar. He had him at 14. My 13th ranked player is Connor Geekie. That's exactly where McKenzie has him. Another player from the Winnipeg Ice, that stacked team. He's a bit bigger, though. He's 6'4", 205. So he's got great size. He's got great skill. 70 points in 63 games in his draft year here. The knock on him, he could be a Ryan Getzlaf kind of impact player. What he needs to improve on to get there is his skating. That has been the knock on his file his whole career. I listened to an interview with him on another podcast, the Draft Cast, with Adam Kilman and Mike Morial. And Geekie was saying that he thinks his improved skating is the most underrated aspect of his game. So if he thinks that his skating has improved enough that it's no longer below NHL average, then this is a player. And if you believe that, then I think you probably move him up your rankings and slip him in the top 10 in there somewhere. Next player on my list is a guy I love, Jager Furcus. Probably too high, being 14th on my list, but he is one of the more electric players to watch. He's got an NHL-ready caliber shot right now. He put that on display at the Top Prospects game where he ripped a nice shot. He scored the Michigan goal this season, so he's a top 6 offensive winger kind of upside. He's got some highlight reel skills, but why he's probably going to be further down on a lot of other people's list, and Bob doesn't even have him inside his first round. He's got him ranked 34th. Is he's 5'10", 154, soaking wet and holding bricks. Very undersized. So if he's not scoring goals, you got to question what is he doing. But I mean, he's 18 years old, and I think he's got time to grow. And I don't think his defensive game is that big of a liability. So Alex DeBrincat was kind of a similar player, similar size, went in the second round, and if he redid his draft, he would be a first round pick all day long. So nuts to the size. I've got Yager Furcus in my first round at 14th. 15th overall, I went with left shot D Kevin Korchinski from Seattle Thunderbirds. I guess he's one of the more complete defenders in this draft. He's got skies. He skates well. His skating is NHL level now. He excels at transitional offense. How good is he in his own end is the question. That's gotten better in his draft season, and you like to see players develop and improve all of the elements of their game, but especially their deficiencies. And Korchinski did that, so credit to him. Bob has him, ranked 11th, so he's got him a little higher. I think he's maybe a little bit of a polarizing defensive prospect. Some guys have him high, some guys have him low. I think I have him probably on the low side compared to the average. Next up, I go 16th overall. I like back to the NTDP program, Rutger McGrarty. He'll be going to Michigan, play college hockey there. He's a lot like Cutter Gauthier. He's got size, he's got skill, he's got good hockey sense. He's a net front presence. He's plays a big, physical, mean game sometimes too. His two-way game is probably better than Gauthier's. His offensive game maybe not quite as refined. His skating isn't as the same level either, which is why I have him further down. But listen to the NTDB episode I did just recently with Pete Krupski. He says he reminds him a lot of one of the Tkachuk brothers. That got my attention. That is a very good comparison especially for banger leagues, fantasy leagues. Bob McKenzie had him ranked 27th, so it sounds like the skating is maybe a little bit more of a concern than I thought. But Luc Robitaille was critiqued really hard for his skating ability, and before Alex Ovechkin came along, Luc Robitaille ended up being the top scoring left winger in NHL history. So skating is something that you can correct. Hockey sense is a little bit harder to fix. Being 5'6" is harder to fix, but you can learn how to skate. Number 17th, I go with Liam Ogren, one of the scouting community's darlings. He plays the game with a lot of pace and urgency, some Charlie hustle, I like to call it. I like that. He does it all. Kid does everything well. Skates well. He's got a good shot. He's smart. He drives plays. He's responsible defensively. He can play a physical game as well. So he's a player who might be a sleeper. That if you do this redraft, 5 years from now, you might have him inside the top 10 or even as far as the top 5. Bob's got him lower than me. He's got him at 21, so not too far down the list, but someone to keep an eye on, potentially a good sleeper there. I guess you can call a first round pick a sleeper. 18th, back to the NTD, right shot defenseman Ryan Chesley. This is a player who has come on strong in the second half of the season. He's a big time riser. He has good size. He plays a two-way game. He's a strong skater with good hockey sense. What he reminds me of this year is Jake Sanderson in his draft year. On the radar, potential first round, kind of maybe. And then as the season wore on, people marveled at, hey, his skating's really good. Oh, he's not a liability defensively at all. And oh, hey, look at that, his offensive game is really developing and coming along this year. And then, before you know it, he's ranked really high in the draft. So I think Ryan Chesley is kind of like a Jake Sanderson light, perhaps. I have him ranked 18th. Bob McKenzie's got him at 25th. So I'm a little bit more bullish on Chesley than Bob and the scouting community, I guess. 19th, Pavel Mintyukov, left shot defenseman from the OHL Saginaw Spirit. Talk about roamer defenseman. This guy's kind of all over the ice. Russian import. Had a fantastic draft year in the OHL with Saginaw. 62 points, and Saginaw was not a very good team. 62 points in 67 games as a defenseman on a bad team. You have to take notice of that. He's got big upside. He's got decent size. He's a really good skater. Still a little bit raw, though, is what you're looking at. And, he's going to need some really good coaching. So whoever drafts him, depending on, what is their draft and development history like? Are they good at, if he gets drafted by Edmonton, that moves him down on my prospect ranking list. If he's drafted by Detroit, that moves him up, kind of thing. So he needs some development to put it all together. But I have him ranked 19th, and he's ranked as high as 12th on Bob McKenzie's list. So, I guess I'm disagreeing with Bob on that one. Number 20, I go Isaac Howard, National Team Development Program again. Isaac's going to NCAA as well. Minnesota Duluth is where he'll be heading. He actually led the NTTB team in scoring last season, outscoring all the other guys who ranked ahead of him. So the question you're asking is how come he's not the top ranked player? Well, he's 5'10", and he lacks some defensive awareness, and he's a little bit soft, a little bit weak. His offensive upside, bang on though, very, very good. So you're going to be looking at a longer term development plan here with Isaac Howard. He'll be needing to figure out the other side of the puck. He'll need to commit a little bit more to his defensive side, and NCAA, he'll get a lot of time in the gym to lift some weights. So if he can do those things, you could have a player here. We both have him ranked 20, Bob McKenzie and I, on our lists. Number 21, I go with another American teammate there, Jimmy Snuggerud. He's a power forward. He plays a really physical and gritty game. He's your, Brad Marchand, Brendan Gallagher, winger kind of pest. Good offense, can play a kind of dirty, gritty game, greasy game. He can drop the gloves as well. And he can score and drive pucks to the net. So, he brings a lot of elements that I really like. Bob has him ranked 17th. I have him ranked 21st. 22, I go Marco Kasper. This is one I'm starting to think I might be a little bit late on with this file. He's an 18-year-old playing in the SHL, playing pro hockey against grown men, getting a regular shift, good time on ice, looking good while doing so. He plays a pro-ready game. Also drafted in the CHL, and here's a player who I think also this would be a step backwards for him, but he was a first-round pick by the Ottawa 67s. So that'll be interesting to see where he plays next season. Again, the NHL team that drafts him will have a lot to say about that. But, this is one of the players who a lot of people think could be one of the more NHL-ready players in this draft. Could even have a shot, depending on who picks him, at playing in the NHL next year with a good camp on a shallow team like Seattle, for example. Although I don't think Seattle would be in a hurry to rush their players into the NHL. And Bob McKenzie has him ranked 10th. So there's an example of why I think I might be a little late to the party on this guy. But it'd be very interesting to see not only when he's drafted, but by who drafts him and where he plays next season. So keep your eyes open on that one. 23, another one of my personal favorites, another National Team Development Program player, defenseman, left shot D, Lane Hudson. Didn't get ranked in Bob's first round. In fact, he's only 40th overall by McKenzie, but I got him 23rd. So with Hudson, he's one of the smartest and most offensively dynamic players in the draft at any position. He's also one of the shortest and smallest players in the draft. If you don't think size matters, then this is a guy that you want to draft sooner than later. If you do think size matters, then don't touch him with Dufour. So I guess a bit of a boom or bust player here. But his hockey IQ, his compete level, and his skill level, I think, overcome any height deficiencies that he has. Listen to Chris Peters' podcast as well, Talking Hockey Sense. He mentions him in the last couple episodes. He's also super high on him for the same reasons that I like him. He says that he's got a very smart active stick. He's a very effective defender. I think about Nick Lidstrom and how he wasn't the biggest, most physical defenseman, but because he was so smart and such a good skater, such an active stick, and then he was able to outsmart the offensive play and was one of the more effective defensemen of all time. So I'm not comparing Lane Hudson to Nick Lidstrom here. I don't think he's going to win, a half a dozen Norris trophies necessarily. I'm just saying that making the comparison that you don't need to be that big in order to be that effective defensively. And when I watch, when I see Lane Hudson play, those are some things that I notice, that he doesn't have to be that big to be that effective. So the 24th ranked player I have on my list is an interesting one. Ivan Miroshnichenko, the Russian left winger, would be a much higher ranked prospect had he been, able to play healthy all season and not have, I think it's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or something like that he's got. It's a pretty significant, life-threatening disease that he's got, and he's getting treatment for it. It sounds like things are going well, and he's getting those treatments in Germany. So he was at the U18, not participating in the U18s, but he was around. So some writers and scouts and players had a chance to chat with him and whatnot, and it sounds like things are going well. So there are two big strikes on his file that keep him out of the top 10 and potentially out of the first round. And that is obviously his health condition, and the other one is his passport. Being a Russian player and the political landscape these days, just hard to with any confidence understand when you can expect that player, even if he's healthy, to be able to come over and play in North America. But the skill and the upside that he has kind of demands that he's a first round pick, especially for some of these teams that have multiple first round selections. If you only have the one pick, it'd be a little bit tricky to go all in and gamble on a player who might never come over or could take a long time to come over. But if you have multiple picks, then you can lock one down earlier and then roll the dice on getting another top 10 pick in the bottom half of the draft with a guy like this. Interesting to note that he was selected in the CHL import draft last weekend in the queue by Blainville Armada. So perhaps they have some potential insight or assurances that, once he's healthy, he's coming. If that be this upcoming season or the one after remains to be seen, or either or neither. They could just be rolling the dice and taking a big swing. I'd be interesting to see which NHL team drafts him, where he's drafted, and then where he plays next season. I think any team that drafts him in the first round would be, I would think, in the camp of encouraging him to get out of Russia and come over to North America and play lots of minutes in the CHL as opposed to middling away on the bench in the KHL. 25th pick, I have Owen Pickering. Now, a lot of people might have him higher on their lists because of a lot of good reasons. He's got, projectable size. He's got some offensive upside. He's a big riser in this year's draft. And I think he's got a lot of development to go still. I think he's pretty raw at this point. And that's okay for an NHL draft. NHL teams are okay to be willing to draft players that might be a little bit more long-term project, as long as they have a lot of potential in it and a good upside. And his development is just getting started, really. I mean, he's had a real riser at the scouting combine. He seemed just really surprised and happy to be there. Gives you an idea of what his expectation for this draft season were, that he didn't think that he would be one of the 100 or so players invited to the combine, and now here he is, not only invited to the combine, but pretty widely a consensus first round pick in the NHL draft. So he's coming out of the dub. Where does Uncle Bob have him? He's got him ranked 23rd. I got him 25th. So we're pretty much in the same wheelhouse there. Next up, player I really like, Jiri Kulich, the Czechia player. Kind of struggled to produce a little bit in the Pro League in the Czech that he played in this year. A little bit limited ice time there. It's not as bad as the KHL with allowing 18-year-olds to play, but still a little bit sheltered. He dominated at the U18s. He had 9 goals in 6 games there. So when you see him play in his peer group, he really stands out. And he's another player that was selected in the CHL import draft again in the queue by Cape Breton. So I'm be really happy to see Jiri Kulich come over to North America and play some junior hockey in his D+1 season. He'll be drafted out of Europe. So all these players that are European and being drafted in the NHL draft, the fact that they're CHL import picks, a little bit tricky with the rules here, but basically they can come over, play the next season in the CHL, and then they're not locked in to the CHL because they're NHL drafted out of Europe. So they can be one and dones if they want and move on to the AHL if that's what their NHL team that drafts them thinks is best for their development, or they can stay and play another season in junior hockey, or they can go back to Europe and play pro hockey over there. They really have a lot of options with what they can do, so they're in good positions. So Bob McKenzie has Kulich ranked 18th overall, and I have him ranked 26th. I'm kind of thinking that Bob was a little bit more spot on with his ranking there. I think he's a player who if he comes over and plays in junior and starts scoring at a pretty prolific rate in North America, his prospect stock and fantasy stock could take a pretty significant spike. Plus, players who do really well in international tournaments like the U18 and the World Juniors, they get an increase or a spike in their trade value because a lot of people don't get much opportunity in North America here to watch Jiri Kulich, European players, play very much, and then they see them at the World Juniors, small sample size, they have a lights out tournament, and they just kind of fall in love with them, and they become must-own players for them, and they're willing to spend perhaps more capital than what their prospect profile really warrants that they're worth. So that's an interesting player to kind of keep an eye on and see where he gets drafted in NHL and where he plays next season. Coming in at 27, I got another Euro. This is Philip Messar. And where does Bob have him ranked? He's got him ranked 30th, so very close to where I have. Some players at 5'10 and 175 are short, yeah, but they're strong. They're not a small player. Some are Semyon Dragonchensev kind of small, but then some are a little bit more robust and don't have a problem going into the gritty areas. Messar's kind of the latter. His offensive skill set is high, but he needs to go into the hard areas. It'd be harder to knock off the puck, I think, to be a more impactful player or play even at all at the pro level, let alone the NHL. So his skill level on Messar is really good. Definitely he can play in the at pro levels and projects to be an NHL player by his skill level, but he reminds me a lot of SDA with the Leafs, where I watched him play with the Petes, and I was like, wow, this kid's got some silky mitts. He can really dangle the puck. Has really good vision, but he's super small. And while I don't really discredit players because they're small, unless they're small and they don't have escapability, they're not ahead of the play where they're hard to hit or hard to catch. They're both kind of easy to box out physically, push off the puck. They're a little bit reluctant to chase the puck into the corner and take a hit from a defenseman to make a play. They'll just give it up. Watch the defenseman go and make the play and count on a teammate to recover the puck and get it back to them, and so on. So I'm not too high on Messar for that reason, but I still have to put him in my first round. Just hey, there's a chance that he grows a couple inches, and there's a chance that he hits the gym and eats some protein shakes and puts some pounds on, and then is a little bit less timid. And I mean, he doesn't need to be a grinder. He just needs to have survivability. Right now, I'm not seeing that, but it's a potential. All right, 28th is the most contentious player in this draft, and that would be Brad Lambert. Formerly pegged as a potential first overall pick, of course. He's really struggled for like 2 years now. His D-1 season wasn't great, and this season he didn't really move the needle at all on his development. Had a trade mid-season, and so everyone was excited that okay, here we go. Now he's going to be on a new team, and we're going to see his offense spike, and that just didn't happen. So he's barely a first-round pick on my rankings, and I really, quite frankly, toyed with the idea of leaving him off. So what put him on is that he's got elite level skating. He's, some people will say he's the best skating forward or prospect in this draft, and his skill level is bordering on the elite side too. I mean, he's got really good puck control skills. But the concerns with his game are the lack of development, the lack of consistency, a lack of compete, and some questionable hockey sense. And those are all really important skills and attributes, I think, to be really successful. So he's also had his CHL rights acquired in the import draft and was actually recently traded. So Saskatoon had selected him in, I believe, last year's import draft, and he was just recently traded to Seattle. So that tells me that he must be interested in coming to North America, just not playing for Saskatoon. This is a player who I would absolutely love to come to North America and play some junior hockey. Now, much like Miroshnichenko or Kulich, he's a player who, coming out of Liga, going into junior, could be conceived as a step backwards in his development, but I think his step backwards in his development was thrusting him into professional hockey before he was ready, like too soon. I think playing a season in junior hockey, in the case of Brad Lambert, would be encouraged and good advice. Allow him to have a season where he can dominate and really gain some confidence, work on proving that he can make an impact in a game and squashing any concerns about his consistency and compete level, and have like a 100-point season in the dub. Now, Lambert's got dual citizenship. He's English and Finnish nationality, so playing in North America wouldn't really require much adjustment for him, with language, culture, or anything like that. So he could come over here and hit the ground running and be lights out good. There's some NHL scouts saying that he's on my do not draft list. Some are saying, yeah, we'd draft him, but only if he's available beyond the first round. We wouldn't waste a first round pick on him. Bob McKenzie's got him ranked 16th, so right smack in the middle of the first round. Now, this is a player who is very low in my rankings on the first round, but I'm confident that he will be a first round pick. And again, I'm looking at teams like Arizona, Seattle, Buffalo that have multiple first round picks, and going for a little bit more sure thing earlier on with one of their earlier picks, and then swinging for the fences with Lambert and trying to get double down on some two prominent prospects. 29th is a Russian, Gleb Trikazov. He is a smart, physical, two-way player with a heavy shot. Bob McKenzie did not have him in his first round. In fact, he was ranked 57th, so barely in his second round. And I'm guessing that has a lot to do with the passport again and being Russian. He's played in the VHL and the MHL, and he was dominant with 45 points in 35 games in the MHL. But he had a small draft year and sample size. The kid's got good upside, but he's another long-term prospect with the Russian factor being pretty relevant on this file. So he might be a player that slips out of the first round that 3 or 4 years from now we look back and he's in North America and he's a middle six player and you think, wow, whoever drafted him in the late in the second round got really good value there. He's first round player all day. So we'll see on that one. Number 30, I went with center from the SHL, Noah Ostlund. McKenzie had him ranked 27th. So again, both think he's a good late first round pick. He's a third draft eligible player from that line in Djurgårdens, along with Liam Ogren and Jonathan Lekaramaki. He's the lowest ranked player on my list out of that trio, but I think they'll all go in the first round. And he was more impactful at the junior level and the U18s. He may be a little bit on the underside size too, but kid's got a motor and he's got some high-end skill. So player to keep an eye on. If you got a late round drafting team, he might be someone who your team could pick up, or you might want to pick up on your fantasy roster. It'd be a couple years out. Might be a year or two away from even coming to North America, let alone the NHL. 31, I go with left shot defenseman, big, mobile, Swedish, Kalle Odelius. He's got some offensive upside, but I think that's kind of more on the limited aspect of what we can expect from him offensively. So from a fantasy perspective, a little bit less attractive unless you got a banger league. He looks like he might be a lock to make the NHL as a minute-munching defenseman with some potential for secondary offensive support. These are players that if you're in a fantasy draft that has up to 30 teams in your league, not necessarily a player I would want to invest a first round pick in, but for real life value and NHL value, I think he is. McKenzie's got him out just outside the first round at 36. And last but not least, another big honkin' D, Liam Bichel. Left shot D again from the SHL Leksand. He's 6'5", 225, physically dominant defender. He's got the mobility and the reach. Offensive upside is questionable again, but had he been healthy and available for the U18 tournament that he missed, I think we might have seen a glimpse of what kind of offensive upside he has. And maybe he'll play for the Swiss at the World Juniors, if it's that tournament in August. Something to keep an eye on when you're watching if Swiss made the tournament even. I don't know. They probably did without Russia being there. And like I said, I believe there's a growing appetite for big physical defensemen who can play a shutdown role, aren't limited offensively, but most importantly have the mobility that you need to play in the NHL, and that's Liam Bichel. And where does Bob have him? He's got him 26th, so also in the bottom of the first round. So that's my first round top 32 rankings for the upcoming draft, which will be about a week from now if you're listening to this. Very excited to be going for this draft. Like I said, CHL import some players there that were selected that are relevant. Adam Sikora didn't make my first round. Drafted by Medicine Hat Tigers. Yuri Kulich, Marco Kasper, Ivan Miroshnichenko, and Jonathan Lekaramaki. A bunch of players draft eligible for the 2023 draft, but who's got time to talk about 2 drafts in one podcast? That'll be something that we look at later on down the line. So that's kind of the end of what I wanted to talk about today. You can catch me on a couple other podcasts coming up here. Recorded last night with the Daughter Prospect boys on an episode of Draftcast where we're talking about the fantasy prospect guide that just came out with Dobber, and so all the senior writers contributed to the top 50. So you can catch me on that with Pat and Kyle, and Keith Duggan's on that, and Dave Hall's on that, and Hayden Sobolewski was also on that. And I apologize if I've just brain farted and forgot anyone else. I also will be recording an episode as a guest on Offside Hockey. So that's a show that you can search out on all of the podcast platforms, and I also will be guesting on Apples and Genos, and so there's 3 other podcasts to check me out, find me on those, give them a little plug. Thanks for the invite, boys. And so that's a wrap on this episode. I will be heading to Montreal, where I hope to be getting lots of interviews and recordings, juicy content from some players, some scouts, some prospect analysts, the whole shebang, GMs perhaps as well. So keep subscribing to my podcast. I thank you very much for everyone who subscribes, and I apologize for the inconsistency and long gaps in some episodes, but I hope you enjoy listening to them. If you do so, please give me a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to. Share it on your social media. Let all your friends and followers know about the show. Anytime you want to give me any kind of feedback, good, bad, or ugly, I'm happy to engage with people on the social media. Twitter, you can find me at Farling, PHARLING, and then the Twitter handle for the podcast is DPR_show, Dobber Prospects Radio Show. All right, thanks again for listening, everyone. Enjoy the draft, and we'll talk to you soon.